Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this opportunity to be open to the awareness of your presence here and now. Arising in this connection that we experience in this moment. We feel your love embracing us, lifting us, healing us. Healing us of our physical and mental wounds. Illuminating our experience. And we give thanks. And for those in our experience who seem to have a need for the awareness of your love, we hold them in consciousness and we see them illuminated, lifted, healed. And for this opportunity to practice your presence, we give thanks. And so it is that together we say Amen. How are you feeling this morning? You feeling on top of it? You've had enough coffee? Oh, no? Yeah, sort of? Yeah, okay. Are you feeling full of self? It just might be vanishing. Watch out. But that's not all bad. In fact, I think that is part of what we experience on the spiritual path, is a progressive letting go of this insistence upon separation, this insistence upon my way or the highway. We have, I've been exploring this book, 7 Lessons of Chaos, and sharing it with you. And there, in our life experience, we seem to have firsthand experience of chaos. So what is it that I'm going to be teaching you about chaos that you don't already know, right? I mean, yeah, chaos exists. We have an opportunity with our life experience to treat it as a laboratory, to look upon it as something that we will learn from if we pay attention, something that if we don't get so hung up on outcome, but rather pay attention to the experience itself, that we may, in fact, in this moment, realize something that we haven't realized before. In this moment, we might see something that we hadn't seen before. In this moment over here, we might gain a perspective that was very interesting. There's a thing that comes through my email about the superior writings of people across the not just political spectrum, but life spectrum. And one of the readings that I ran across this week is a discussion of the effect that automobiles have had on spiritual communities. He used the word church. He's an evangelical, but I found it interesting that his perspective on the effect of automobiles, because it was at the time when churches were neighborhood churches. You showed up at church regardless of your belief. I mean, it was a community center. It was a coming together of the community at least once a week to share your life experience, right? So it wasn't really that critical what was being taught at the community center. It was that people came together with the shared purpose of hearing what someone else had to say, but not necessarily believing it, and knowing that everybody around you had different perspectives, that there was no expectation that you were going to believe what was being told you, but that you would consider what was being said. And in that vein, the community center, the church as it was called, was really a place to come together of people of various minds. And that the advent of the automobile was one where churches now became consumer products. That is to say, you bought the church that you wanted, that you would travel 5 miles or 10 miles or 15 miles to attend a group of like-minded individuals who were listening to what was being taught, and the presumption was that you would believe what is being taught. Okay? Now I have striven, I have strived to not let that be the case here, but I can't control what your perspectives are, but I offer you thoughts for your consideration. Well, so this perspective on the impact of the automobile on church life is that the automobile allowed churches to be monolithic in thought. That is to say, what was being believed was common. What was being taught, what was expected to be taught, would fall in line with what was being believed. So there was actually a mutual dependence between the teacher in that community and the congregation, that the teacher would be expressing what was expected and the congregation would be believing what was being expressed. You see? So I thought that was an interesting insight. I never thought of it. And being open to what an evangelical might say offered me some expansion in appreciation of our current circumstances, our current society. Well, that's really kind of an incidental thing, because that's not what the topic is about this morning. The topic is about looking at this idea of self that we hold and exploring just how precise those boundaries are. That is to say, do we look upon self as being this entity that has a perspective on those things that are going on around it? That perspective may or may not be right, but that the self is a definite, tangible thing. I suggest to you that it's not. That the self is really something that we have conjured up, something that we have taken on as a concept. Oh, there it is. Taken on as a concept to simplify our lives. There's, in this book, David Peat and John Briggs offers us this idea, I think. Yes, it does. Chaos theory tells us that when life seems to be the most complicated, a simple order may be just around the corner. And when things appear simple, we should be on the lookout for hidden nuance and subtlety. When we are going through our experience, we certainly have, well, let me say, that I have a tendency to simplify. When I go to a Mexican restaurant, I look upon the menu and I say, well, that's nice for everybody else, but I know what I want. And I order a bean burrito smothered with everything. And to make it even more simple, I go just to one Mexican restaurant. Okay, so I look upon my life and I desire simplification. Well, okay. That works in that I know what I'm going to get. It's pretty consistent food, and actually it's good food as far as I'm concerned. But what am I missing? Well, when we put together the ads for the digital sign, I took my camera over to Mi Tierra, which is the restaurant that I spoke of, and I asked them to bring out several different dishes that they would like to have photographed. And so I took photographs of these various dishes, and it turns out that when I was done with the photography, here were these 4 plates of dishes that they couldn't serve them to anybody else. They said, well, if you want them, you can have them. So I sampled from each, and boy, they were really good. And so it is, I have lost the opportunity in my desire for simplification to explore other delicious food at that one restaurant. I mean, startling, I know. The attempt at simplification in chaos is something that I think many people are motivated by. But as this states, there is an opportunity. When we are experiencing simplicity, there is an opportunity to look for nuance and subtlety. In chaos theory, you have undoubtedly heard of Benoit Mandelbrot. He died just about 4 years and 10 days ago. But he was a Polish, born in Poland, moved to Switzerland, I think, and then moved to the U.S. He was a mathematician, and he offered some codification of this thing called chaos. And you've probably seen this Mandelbrot set. This is a mathematical presentation of a simple formula. And the graphical presentation indicates the degree, the speed with which a reiterated formula, that is, you have a formula where a value, never mind. Within this graphic, there is the opportunity to zoom in to a greater and greater level of detail. For instance, if you chose to come in on this point here on the left and zoom in, what you would see is an increasing level of complexity in the design. You would see perhaps something like this. But in that complexity, there is the repetition of this same image, zoomed in. And further zooming in, although the lights are a bit bright here, but you see that same image here in the midst of this complexity. This graphic really illustrates for us that if we pay attention in any particular moment and we are in this state of, wow, everything is just pretty straightforward, if we pay attention, we can in fact see the nuances that are present in that experience. And if we are willing to do that, if we're willing to step into the more complex, we will find a greater degree of appreciation for the moment. Okay? As we go into this, as we strive for simplicity in the midst of our daily lives, we come upon something like this. Is there a square there or not? It depends upon your perspective, right? If you are insisting that a square has boundaries, then there is no square. All it is a design graphic for the Pac-Man game. There is no square. But as we look at this, we see, 4 circles with edges out. That must mean, it couldn't be that. It must be just 4 circles with a square on top of it. In our mind's eye, we do these gyrations to make our experience, to simplify our experience. Well, There's a Jim O'Brien wrote a book about titled "The Man I Killed," and he was a soldier in Vietnam. He was in a firefight with the Viet Cong, and he killed a Viet Cong soldier. And the platoon was advancing in that direction. And so he had the opportunity to see the man that he killed. And he was dumbstruck by the degree of the wounds that he inflicted upon this man. And as he was standing there staring at the man he killed, he entered into that man's life. What was that man's family? What was his experiences? What were his needs? What were his desires? Did he have children? Did he have brothers? Did he have sisters? What was his life like? And so he was locked in this relationship with this man that he killed. And as his platoon mates were taking care of the body, he was in this, not reverie, but in this altered state anyway, to understand who this person was that he killed. And we can go on and extrapolate from that. Who was it that died, and who was it that killed? Who was the victim, and who was the perpetrator? Yes, it was war. Yes, some people would say it was justified. Other people would say, no, it wasn't justified. War is never justified. And whether you come down on one side or the other, we can appreciate that in this merging of lives, where the perpetrator and the victim came into, not necessarily consciously, but there was a merging, a fuzzing of the boundaries between the two selves. Certainly that was the case in this man's experience, Jim O'Brien's experience. So, is there an other? We certainly have the experience of this is happening to me, that's happening to you. Boy, I wouldn't want to be in your life. Boy, that life would really suck. Oh boy, I'd really like to be in your life. That life really looks good, but I can't because I'm out here and you're over there. So we have this perception that we are separate and apart from each other. But is that true? Sam Harris, who is a noted atheist, at least he is a non-theist. He recently wrote a book. We used to have a book out there. I don't know; it may still be in the library, but called "The End of Faith." And I found that book to be interesting because he was addressing this question of the God out there. How can we have faith in a God out there when we don't see the experience of the God out there? That every time we try to conjure a square, as we look at that image that we think we've had, there is no boundary to it. There is no definition of it. Well, he wrote a recent book called Waking Up, and in this book, he talks about the lack of credibility of a God out there, but a very significant appreciation of the spiritual life. That is the exploration of who we are and how we relate to this out here. he uses this image of the three circles and the square to indicate that we think that we are a square. We think that we are a separate self. But as we get further and further and further and further into the depths of exploration of who it is we are, that those boundaries start to disappear. This series started with the Drepung monks coming through and offering us a demonstration of impermanence. But one of the aspects of many schools of Buddhism is that the exploration of self yields no self. That is, as one becomes more and more attuned to the reality of who they are, it is not that we are separate and apart, but rather we are part and parcel. In our consideration of chaos, as we look at a river, and we see, as we stand back and we look at a river, maybe we're looking at the Mississippi River, and we're seeing it from afar, and we see that, yes, the water is going from here, it's going to there, it's going from the north to the south. And as we approach the river and we come upon the bridge and we stop and look down at the river, we see that, yes, there's currents moving this way and boiling and eddies flowing here. And we can see, oh, there is a swirl and there is an eddy and there is a bubbling of current. But as we watch, while they may in fact be fairly consistent, their boundaries are not as defined as we would picture them. One of the aspects of drawing from the right side of the brain is that you let go of concepts so that you can replicate what you are seeing. We get caught on concepts and we try to draw an image based upon these concepts of what an eye should look like and what a nose should look like and what a mouth should look like. And in fact, if we pay attention carefully and let go of those concepts of what this should be and what that should be, we will have a much better opportunity to draw an image. In fact, Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain, that book uses as an exercise to take a photograph, and as you try to draw a photograph, turn the photograph upside down so that you lose this module of an eye. You lose this module of a mouth, and you're now put into a position where you are attempting to just replicate the image in one to the drawing in the other. But if we let go of these preconceived ideas of what life should be, what our experience should be, and instead turn to the appreciation of the moment, we will have a much fuller, a much richer, a much more instructive experience. We're going to pass that. As we look at this idea of self, and we cling to this idea of self, Pete and Briggs offers this. Perhaps one of the reasons that we experience such secret satisfaction in feelings of anger and hate is that they seem to make the world simple and clear-cut. Hatred projects the other as the enemy, offering us the illusion that if we could just eliminate the other, major problems would be solved. Feelings of love are more subtle and complex. In love, the other's depth and uniqueness are appreciated. And so as we come to appreciate, as we come to practice looking upon the other and seeing what it is that you can love in that, versus looking upon the other and seeing what you can hate in that, what you're doing is you're choosing for complexity. You're choosing for nuance and subtlety, because love is that way. It allows you to have a richer, fuller experience. As Jesus offered us this in Matthew 5:38, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. What is he suggesting in this passage? What he is suggesting is letting go of this idea of separation of self. Letting go of this idea of this is mine and that is yours, and oh, I'd like to have that, so I'm going to try to take that. So we have this idea of separate self. We have this idea of clinging. We have this idea that life can be simplified if I just draw my boundary. What he is suggesting is practice letting go of the boundaries. Practice doing some smudging of those limitations, of those limits of self, and allow yourself to enter into this mystical experience of I am the other. He goes on in Matthew to offer us this. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Well, you've heard me use this phrase, this passage, numerous times. It's perhaps, as you might guess, one of the favorite passages in the gospel for me. What he is pointing to is that we are not separate and apart. If we want to really understand the arising into a greater awareness, to an expansive consciousness, we let go of this idea of loving the neighbor for what the neighbor can give to us, but rather loving the neighbor as ourselves. Not because it's the right thing to do, but rather it is the thing that will allow us to realize who we are, to enter into heaven, to enter into this consciousness that is always present among us if we choose. And that's really the point, is that we have the opportunity to choose. So what do we choose in this moment? Do we choose to enter into this realization that we are indeed one and the same with each and every one around us? The only difference is just the way we appear. The only difference is our consciousness. It's okay. We can have different ideas. We can have different perspectives. But it is so easy to stereotype and to demonize the other because it simplifies our life. Let go of that. Step out. Be brave. Arise into the consciousness that you are an expression of the God that I am also an expression of. We are arising in this moment as separate individuals, but that does not define who we are. We are an expression of God in this moment. Look upon the other and realize that fact and appreciate the nuance and the subtlety that that person brings to this experience. We'll have our meditation. As we breathe into this moment, let us consider a relationship that we have. Perhaps one that is challenging, one that is loving, perhaps one that is not very familiar, perhaps one that is all too familiar. Choose a relationship. Consider the relationship. How do you relate to the other? Certainly you have your feelings, you have your beliefs, you have your history of experiences and your perception of these experiences. And certainly those are, as a sum total, different from the other. Perhaps that's even the definition of self, is the sum of all of that. But now consider how you relate to the other. As you look upon the other, where do you see the boundary between you and the other? As you speak to the other, where is the boundary? Is it at the end of your tongue, or is it at the surface of their eardrum? As you look upon the other, where is the boundary? Is the boundary at the surface of your clothing? Or is it deep in the rods and cones of their retina? Maybe it's even deeper than that. Maybe it's even at the point where those signals from the vision interact with the thinking matter, the thinking structure of the other's brain. How about the boundary of the other? At the surface of their clothing, or deep within your own gray matter? The voice, the vision, the touch, even their presence may not be as defined as you think it is. Perhaps the other does not exist as you think the other does. Perhaps you do not exist as you think you do. Perhaps, indeed, you are each an expression of God, testing each other's own awareness of that divinity. Perhaps that which you think is separate is merely a divine experiment in the reactivity of two expressions. If that is so, how would you relate to the other? Allowing this shift, if one occurred, allowing this shift in the perception of self and perception of other to remain with you as we come back into this time and space, as we share the words of the Lord's Prayer.